Welcome to today's webinar, courtesy of the Kentucky Small Business Development Center right here in Louisville. We're all about hooking you up with free, super secret business coaching and training services. It doesn't matter if you're just dipping your toes in or gearing up for a big expansion. We've got the goods, the tools, and the know-how to help you win. To get the scoop, cruise on over to LouisvilleSmallBusiness.com or hit us up at 502-977-5800. Big thanks for tuning in to today's webinar. Feel free to drop your questions or chat it up with our speaker using the chat feature. Let's dive in.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Dave Eck. I'm the director here at the Louisville Small Business Development Center. Glad to see everyone today. Joined, as always, with my good friend and coworker, Janet Flaw. Hey, Janet.
Hi, happy Tuesday to you guys. It's not a pretty day, but we're here all the same.
Yeah, well, it is a Tuesday as such, and so as no matter what happens out there in the weather, we're gonna do it regardless. So, and just to make sure that you guys can hear and see us well, like always, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a toolbar. But if you don't, just move your cursor down to the bottom, and toolbar should pop up, and there you'll see the chat feature. Just click on that, and if you wouldn't mind, just telling us hello, give us your name and where you're joining from. This is really what I enjoy doing, is because I could see where everybody joins from. Because we get people from all over the place sometimes, and it's always great. So there's Jared. Hey, Jared, good to see you today. Anybody else out there? There we go. Lexington. Hey, Jared. Great. Thanks for joining us today. There's Jane. Jane Shadle from Pittsburgh. Huh. Wonder how you heard about this. And there's Erica from Columbus, Ohio. Wow, we're just getting folks from everywhere. Nick, to Albany, Indiana. Good to see you, Nick. Thanks for joining. Jessica from Livermore, Kentucky. Where's Livermore at, Jessica? Hey, Gabriel. Here in Louisville, Kentucky. Good to see you. Lexington, hey Pamela, good to see you. Jeremy in Lexington. Frankfurt, hi Angie. Olive Hill, hey Matthew. 30 minutes south of Owensboro. All right, Livermore. We'll have to get out there one day. Hi Deidre. All right. Thank you guys for sharing. That's the funnest part of this whole thing, actually. It's doing that. So thanks for joining us. And as we go through today, if you have any questions or comments or want to pop in on something, just put it in the chat there. I'll be watching, and we'll stop and get your questions answered, or at the end we'll have a little discussion too. So this is a great time to kind of share things and learn from our speakers and stuff. So have a great guest today. And we thought we would do things a little bit different, because when I asked our guest to come on, she goes, I don't do PowerPoint, so we're not going to do that. So here we are. We're going to have a little discussion, but we'll show you some things. But joining us today is Ann Shadle. She is the owner of the Mind Cafe here in Louisville, Kentucky. She also owns Left Brain Solutions, which is an operations consulting firm with a focus on restaurant operations. So she has taken what she's learned in her years in the restaurant business, and she's providing it out there with her own consulting firm. But the cool thing that I say about the Mind Cafe is, yes, it has great food and cool ambiance and all that, but you guys are about 17 years old now.
17, yeah.
And most restaurants have kind of a lifespan of maybe 3 to 5 years before either kind of falls apart or the concept gets stale, whatever. But you guys have managed to maintain and keep yourself fresh and keep on going for 17 years. So that's incredible.
Thank you.
And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the people that you hire. I think that people make an organization, and you've got people that have been with you for years.
Mm-hmm.
Who's your longest serving employee?
Our sous chef has been with us for 16 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then we have several that have been with us for almost 10 years. And then my favorite is I have a couple folks that were with us for 4 or 5 years back in like 2010, 2011, were there for a while, left, and then came back in the last 3 or 4 years. which has been pretty cool to know that they came back, you know, specifically because they liked working with us.
Yeah. I think that says a lot about your all's culture. Is like people will go somewhere else and think, yeah, this isn't so great. I'm going to go back to the Mind Cafe. And one of the things we hear a lot at the Small Business Development Center, the complaints and the challenges that small businesses face is, you know, hiring people and taking care of them and making them committed. And you seem to have cracked the code on that. So we're going to hopefully dig in here a little bit and see if we can extract some little tidbits here and there and learn a bit about how you do it.
Sounds great.
And so, again, as you guys out there have questions regarding employees and how to treat them and how to hire them, just put them in the chat and we'll get those questions asked for you, because here's a good opportunity to have a great discussions with a great expert. So, what's the first thing you do when you think about hiring? If I was to ask you, what if I was going to come to you with advice and I'd say, man, my employees are all over the place. I'm having trouble with productivity or hiring people. What would you tell me to do?
Well, so when you start talking about the beginning, I think it's actually important to talk about the very end and then work backwards from there, because the end, I think, informs how you do everything from the beginning and then moving forward through that. So my personal goal is to get every employee who leaves to give me a long notice, so that it's not just they walk off because they're unhappy, or even a 2-week notice, that they would still work that out. My hope is that I can get people to give me a month or even more than that. So that's my goal. And then, so I start from the very beginning with that whole element in mind. So I kind of call it the arc of hiring is my particular philosophy. So, I mean, it's not all that secretive or exciting. It's just treat people how you would want to be treated, you know, is kind of what everything sort of comes down to and is based in, is that understanding. But knowing that every single interaction you have with every employee every day for the entire time that they're with you, that has to be what you're keeping in mind. That's where it can get challenging, because it is a daily grind, and people do things that are frustrating, but you have to keep that sort of goal in mind.
Let's go back to something that you said, because I don't know if folks out there have worked in any corporate jobs, but a lot of times when you give your 2-week notice, they walk you out the door in that second. And you are doing the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Have you had any bad experiences?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so there's two sort of versions of that. One is that the employee tells me they're leaving and they say, you know, I'm going to work for the next 30 days, you know, and I'll help train my replacement, et cetera. So that's one version of it. The other version of it is that I decide that they need to leave, and then there's that sort of thing, you know, where you say, okay, we're done and we're done right now. I've also had, you know, many positive experiences, certainly some negative experiences, where I say to an employee, it doesn't seem like this is working out, and so in 2 weeks you're going to be done, or in 30 days you're going to be done. It's a risk, and again, I've had some bad experiences with it, but the times that it works well, it works very well, and you have, you know, a connection for life, essentially, if you can figure out a way to pull it off. It changes the structure, and you know, there's a lot that goes into it, but my whole goal with all of this stuff is to have enough time to find a good person to replace that person who is leaving. And that takes some time, right? 2 weeks, I don't care what job you're in, that's really not enough to find somebody unless you had already been recruiting actively before that person gave you their notice. So, so that's where having, you know, if somebody is giving me their notice that they're leaving, I want a month. I've had employees give me an open-ended notice that says, I will stay until you find somebody to replace me, and I will help you train them, and then I'll leave whenever all of that's done, which is kind of unheard of in the restaurant industry.
Yeah, very much.
So
that's basically, it sounds to me like the core of it is that you have a positive and honest work environment from the beginning. Talk a little bit about how do you build that?
Right. So, I mean, to sort of to your question earlier of if things are not going well for an organization, how do you turn it around?
Mhm.
Or, right, because even when you're in startup phase, company culture is like the last thing on your mind. You're just sort of surviving and trying to
Right.
make money, and find people. And so I certainly experienced that as well, right? So when we opened the Mind Cafe in 2007, I was a child. I had no idea what I was doing. I hired people who had thick packet background checks because I didn't realize that background checks could be that thick, which means there's lots of charges.
Not that they have a lot of background experience.
No, it's a very different thing. Yeah, learned that one the hard way.
Yeah.
So so I had when I look back to my first probably 5 years of running the restaurant, we had folks who were fine, who were good, but they weren't sort of the kind of employees that I have now. So this is when it's really difficult, is when you have people who are with you who are sort of what I call like B players,
Mm-hmm.
who may do the job well but are not necessarily a culture fit, or they have a bad attitude, or this one element of their work is not very good but the rest of them is really good. Maybe they have a great attitude but they're bad at the technical skills, right? So this is where there's the flow shifting that has to happen of like extracting the employees who are not A players and replacing them. But that, I mean, that could take years, right? So and that's exactly what we did. Like I had a sort of moment in time when I realized I had this one employee who will forever hold a dear spot in my heart, that I was like, oh, he's really just a responsible, normal human being. He comes to work on time. He doesn't cause any problems when he's there. He wants to work hard. He just wants to go home with his family at the end of the day. That's it. And I was like, I want more people like him. So, piece by piece over time, I learned to identify those particular characteristics as I was interviewing for people. But again, it takes time. So it has to be something that you, as the person who's managing the HR for an organization, have the time and capacity to, to sort of go through that process. And it can take a couple years.
Mm-hmm. So I guess you have a process then now that's kind of solidified where you identify leaders in the organization and you build them up and try to model the other folks towards them.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the thought is, what kind of management position do you need? Like what are the specific skills that you need from that, right? And then what are the personality characteristics or cultural sort of elements that you're looking for? So that kind of goes to one of the HR tools that I have and I work with my clients building, is having appropriate job descriptions, so detailed and accurate job descriptions. So if I'm trying to bring up a leader, I would want to know what it is that I need before I start to try to identify those people, right? And if you're creating a new leadership position, this is like it can often be difficult the first go around to know what you need, because you don't exactly know what you need because you haven't had that before.
Right.
So so this is where the sort of like having an open, honest, transparent culture and relationship with the folks that are working with you is super important. But I mean, there's like the sort of thing where people often say that people sometimes get promoted outside of their area of strength because they were good at the sort of like position that they had been in, and then you bring them up into a leadership position, or even just like a step up, but they were better at that, and then now they're promoted outside of their area of strength. So, and I've definitely done this, because to some degree you may not know if their strengths match those of the of the leadership position that you're asking them to move into.
Right.
So again, where I think this is important is having clarity of what you need from a technical perspective, one, and then from a cultural perspective, what are those pieces that you need. That gives you a better chance of finding, of identifying the right kind of person, but it can still be a bit of trial and error, which is the sort of painful reality of this stuff, is that, I can give as many tools as I can possibly give. You just have to go do it and try it and learn the lessons and try and course correct without having to learn the same lesson twice or three times, if at all possible.
So as part of this, is there a lot that you do in like, I don't know, employee rewards or recognition or things? Is that an important part of this
Yeah,
culture building?
certainly. You know, because employees want to be recognized when they've worked hard, right? So, and there's a ton of different ways you can do that. So I think having like a consistent structure for evaluations is important. That they know that from the beginning, they know when those are going to happen, they know what the reward is for, you know, for each year or whatever the period of time is that you're evaluating them on. So there's all of those kind of like formal and official things. And then there's all of the other sort of like non-traditional benefits that I think can be offered, because money is obviously a big question, right? And so if you're a small business, having a ton of extra money to, whether it's pay for health insurance or give big cash rewards for sales goals, et cetera, that, you know, that can be not really in the cards. So I work with, you know, my clients to come up with like what are sort of non-standard rewards and benefits to offer like that. So sometimes for restaurants, it can be giving your employees access to a wholesale purchasing credit, right? So like we have wholesalers that we purchase from, so I could give my employees a $50 credit to buy from those same wholesalers if people wanted to buy meat or fish or something like that. Trading gift cards with other organizations that you're friends with, so that you give a, you know, a gift card to another restaurant for folks who've done a particularly good job. So yeah, but I think it's there need to be things that the employees know are coming, like those evaluations, and then there's other things that when something has been done sort of extra above and beyond, or like we just finished Derby week here in Louisville, so it's always a week when people work hard, extra hard, you know, so doing something like that to thank people in those moments is important.
Mm-hmm. So here's a good time to ask this question. Gabriel asked this. What is your philosophy on pay range when posting a job and hiring? I never want a potential candidate or new employee to feel like they were not worth the highest pay for the position, especially when they are required to complete the same amount of tasks at the same level of effort. How can I articulate that the offer is reflective of their experience and not show them to take it personally and cause a subconscious negative feeling towards the company? Well, that's a great question.
Sure, yeah, because that's like right from the get-go.
Right.
You know, that there could be some kind of like, oh, I wasn't good enough to get the top range of the salary.
Right.
I mean, I think in an interview, I think you have to be clear on saying, like, you know, if you have X amount of experience, that correlates to this particular part of the salary range, right? So having clarity with what they would need to have or need to do to get to the different numbers, I think is important. And that may be something that you could even write in the, you know, in the job description or in the posting, to say so much experience equals, you know, whatever particular dollar amount. I've also done things where if I have a range of a starting pay rate, they start like a touch below the sort of higher part, and then I say, if you know, within the first 60 days, if you haven't missed any shifts, if you're performing up to our standards, we'll then increase you up to the higher part of the range once you've shown that you can, you know, that you can do all the things that we need you to do, and you've kind of gone through the training process. So that couldn't be another sort of like element of that. That's, you know, if you brought them in and they didn't have all the experience that you wanted, but then pretty quickly they were showing that they were proving themselves to be a solid person, and you want to make sure that you can retain them. If you're able to pay that additional money, then I would say go ahead and do it after some kind of 60 or 90 day review or evaluation. I mean, with like any kind of additional money that's given, always tie it to some kind of performance conversation, you know, because it's you're just missing an opportunity to do that if you don't.
Exactly. So you have employees that have been with you for a huge amount of time, and that's crazy in the restaurant business. So what are the things that you do to minimize that turnover? And again, I think you have to have some amount of turnover just because you go through people, but for the most part, you manage to keep people for a long period of time if those are the ones you want. So what is it that you minimize that?
I mean, it kind of goes back to like that. Literally every conversation, every single thing I do is with that goal in mind. So I like all the interactions that I have with staff that works with us. I'm sort of sensing like, how are they feeling about things, right? And if I can feel that there's a level of frustration or irritation, or I sort of feel like burnout is like something, like a word that may be in the ethos for that particular person, this is when I'm having more conversations with them. I'm checking in with them more often. I'm just like straight up asking them, are you happy? Are you enjoying this? Are you having fun? I mean, I ask that position to people fairly, or ask that question to people fairly often, right? Like, is this still fun? Because I want to make sure that it is. So I mean, there are formal things, but then it is sort of this, just like this informal level of assessing how people seem to be feeling, that every time you have an interaction with an employee, you have to be paying attention to that stuff. And sure, that probably sounds exhausting, that every time you talk to one of your employees, you're thinking about that stuff. I can just tell you that that's what I do,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and so then there's also sort of questions of like, how many people are you doing that for, right? So we have like, I don't know, 35 people that work between the restaurant and catering team, something like that. And I spend obviously the majority of my time managing the managers, right? So within those folks, then I have consistent meetings with all of the managers, and I'm asking them questions about the folks that they're managing, right? That are their, direct reports. And that same sense of like, okay, that person was saying that they were kind of irritated with their schedule, or that they wanted to do 2 days a week serving instead of 3 days a week. Okay, like, let me talk to that. So I'm sort of picking up these data points about people's level of satisfaction via the managers. And then also having my own kind of FaceTime with all of the folks that the managers are managing, to try and get some additional data points. But I'm not spending an enormous amount of time talking with every single person. It's this sort of like, I have my own checkpoints that are pretty quick, but then I'm also paying very close attention to what the managers are saying. If people seem like they're, not happy with their schedule, if they're not happy with the amount of money that they're making, if they're, irritated with the work, if they're getting frustrated quickly,
Mm-hmm.
if they can't handle it. So you have to pay very close attention to those data points that the managers give you, and then follow up on them yourself, and have additional conversations with people. So it's a lot of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that stuff is energizing. This is where, every business owner that I talk to says that managing employees is the most annoying thing of the work that they do, right? Like, it's nonstop.
Mm-hmm.
And it's constant, which is a synonym for that, right? But it deserves being said in two ways, because it's, we can't do these businesses, you can't grow without having people with you. Right. And so it's a quote unquote necessary evil. But if you are energized by the management of the employee piece of things, boy, is that nice.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than sort of putting up with it, because it's, it's necessary.
It can be a learned skill, though, don't you think? I mean, try to be energized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, to me, those are the things that, when I've seen people come in and learn a sort of life skill, or improve an element of their, kind of personal life because of the work that they've been doing with us, that to me is what really is like, this is totally worth it,
Mm-hmm.
is that you can, when you can identify somebody who has potential to move up into a leadership position, and then, through stepping into that leadership position, they can grow and become a stronger person and handle conflict differently, or whatever it is, that you can see as a benefit in their personal life because of the lessons they've learned in the work that you're doing with them. That's like, okay, it may be a tiny little world, but like, I made a difference with this one person, and that was really rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I think you can learn to kind of get into it when you have some of those wins. They don't happen every day, but you definitely need to enjoy them when they happen.
So I'm going to ask the question I know everybody's going to want to know, is like, how do you find and attract employees? Because again, you do have turnover. It's not like everybody stays forever, but but it's like you almost have to always be looking for employees. So what's the process there?
I mean, that to some degree, I think is a bit of it, is you know, even if you don't have an open position in the moment, but somebody good comes along, you know, it's worth like, I will stay in touch with people who, you know, I had this one guy, he's been gone for a couple of years, but he had come in between our lunch and dinner shift in like 2017, maybe, dropped off his resume. And I was like, oh, this is a normal human being. That's our marker of somebody who's going to work out. And I was like, I don't have anything right now. Or I had like one shift a week as a server assistant, and he was looking for like 3 or 4 days a week serving. So I was like, you know, I'm gonna hold on to your resume, and as soon as I have something, I'm gonna call you. And so then like a month later, I called him and I was like, I don't have anything yet, but I just wanted to let you know that I still have your resume on my desk. You know, so that's sort of like, if you have a good person and you don't have a position, that's sort of like what I would say to do with that, is to continue to stay in communication with them, because like 3 months later, I ultimately ended up hiring that person and he stayed with us for several years. So that's one. The sort of harder side is like when you need somebody desperately and you can't find somebody good, right? This is the hardest part of it.
Right.
And so just, I mean, to some degree, it's like, can you have what I call a plan A, plan B, and plan C, which is like some sort of temporary solution that, you know, you can cover the shifts to buy you a little bit more time until you find the right person.
Mhm.
And that can happen sometimes, right? Like
Right.
with whether you have people on your existing team that want more hours, like, but don't have them. So then you're like, okay, can you do these shifts for this period of time? Or you have people who are just like willing to work extra, and maybe you have to pay them overtime, but they're willing to do it. So let's just do that so that you can buy yourself some more time to find a good person.
Yeah.
If you need 3 cooks, right, all at the same time, and your sous chef is doing all of that cooking, I mean, this is when you're just going to hire a warm body, right? And
Right.
you're going to do your best, and you're just going to consistently still continuing to be looking for other people, because the chances that desperate hire is going to be amazing, that's going to stay with you for 5 years, is pretty low,
Right.
right? So this is where, like, some of this stuff, you know, there are phases to like the life cycle of running a business. So at the beginning, for the first year, 2 years, 3 years, I mean, and I've had periods after we had been open for 10 years where I couldn't find a decent line cook to save my life, you know.
Right.
You know, and you just like, so you just do your best with it, right? And then you're continuing to look. But I do think putting some of the sort of HR processes in place that are like the standardized and consistent structures do help you, you know, with either identifying that somebody is not the right fit or that somebody is the right fit, and then you have a better chance of getting them in and giving them a good training process and a good onboarding process that's going to hopefully lead to longer retention for that particular person. So like taking the time when you have the energy and the capacity to build those HR processes. And these are some of the things in the tool that we're going to, you know, make available to folks today. When you have the time to do that, it makes it so that the next time you're hiring, you're set up and you can move faster.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, because when we were talking about this, I was pretty impressed the way she has systemized the hiring process. And so she has developed a tool, and maybe now's the time that we just kind of walk through that
Sure.
and kind of talk through how you set everything up and go through the whole thing. So I'm going to share my screen here very quickly. And this is a book that you use with you use it internally at the restaurant, and then you use it with your consulting
I
clients
use it
as
with my
well.
clients. Yeah.
So we'll get this going here. Hopefully everybody can see that well.
Yeah. So.
Wait a minute.
Nope. Yeah, nothing yet there yet.
Okay, hang on.
Okay.
Sorry. Thank you, Janet.
There we go.
Let's see this one here. It's always something. There we go. How's that, Janet?
Looks
Yep.
great.
Okay.
Cool.
So, this is, we can go over this later. Yeah, this is just some of the different things I do with my clients. Me. So there are 4 steps here that are in this tool. There's a couple other sort of beyond that that I also help people build, but this is, I think there is an order to building these different HR processes. And if you do them in this order, you end up being able to like copy and paste stuff so that you're not building everything from zero.
Right.
Which, so, you know, after steps 4, then like 5, 6, and 7 are much easier. But also, this is definitely not the order in which I built all of these. So I have to, you know, I say like what the ideal is, and then I'm like, you know, what the reality is, at least for me. The first thing I think that I built was a handbook for the restaurant, and I started using that with every new hire, and then I've made lots and lots of different iterations to the handbook. But I mean, none of this stuff is rocket science. None of it is like anything that's wildly unique. It's just the process of building this stuff can be cumbersome. A, taking the time to do it, B, knowing what words to use. So I have found that it is one of these things that when I work with my clients, like they sort of like talk stuff out loud, and then I'm typing and taking notes, and we're wordsmithing stuff together, so that, because it just like it's basically like homework and busy work, and so often there's that fire to put out, or there's something that's more engaging or more exciting to be doing than writing out job descriptions or interview questions. And so that's where I found that when people sort of carve out some time to invest in this, it can be helpful to have like an accountability partner, somebody processing stuff with them. So the first exercise is building a core value statement for your organization. So when I say for every person that you hire, they need to sort of check 2 boxes. One, they need to have the specific skills that you need for that particular position. So if they're a graphic designer, they need to be able to use the graphic design software that you're using. And then 2 is that they need to be a culture fit. And so creating the core value statement is essentially putting, when we say culture fit, it's putting that into particular language. So it doesn't matter how old an organization is, if you don't have this already written down, these are the things that are sort of intangible. Like when I say that guy was a normal human being and I knew he was going to work out, I was absolutely right, but I didn't have words to say other than a normal human being, which that's not specific enough.
So I've, you know, been told many times that you hire for culture fit because you can train skills.
Which is very true. Yeah. I mean, there's some skills like I can't hire, well, I don't know. I'm saying it, I'm like, I've also done that. You know, yeah, that is much more the truth, right? Because if somebody is not energized by talking to the general public, you can't change that core element of who they are and how they show up in the world.
Right.
So yeah, it is super important to understand this part of your organization. And every time, as my dad says, every time you introduce a new person into the organization, you've now changed the culture, right? So if it was just 2 people in the organization initially, that was one culture, we add a third, and now it's a totally different culture because every person adds something to that, either positive or negative or neutral. And so having some kind of grounding words with what it means to be a successful member of the organization, this is helpful. So the core value statement is first. I'm just going to sort of go over the plan, and then we'll go into them in a bit more depth. This core value statement is 1. 2, identifying roles in the organization that you need, and then writing job descriptions for those come second. And in this document, you're already starting to borrow language from the core value statement at the top, where you say, this is what it means to be a good member of our team. The third part of the process is to create interview questions or an interview process, because it's more than just the questions. It's like, what are going to be the different steps? How many interactions are you going to have with them? How can you give yourself the best chance of knowing the most important information about a person during the interview process, while knowing that there is still just an element of risk, right, with every person you hire, but trying to create as much structure around that as possible. And then the 4th step is building an employee handbook, so that you're giving language to both the specific skills and the culture piece of what it means to be a valuable member of the organization. So, okay, so when you're building a core value statement, so first, what you're trying to do is to come up with a handful of specific words that again, describe what it means to be a contributing member of the organization. So what I say with the core value statement is that when you write this, it's not what you hope for your organization to be. It needs to be an accurate current representation of the organization. Because if you write this whole pie in the sky stuff about things that you wish you were, and then you read it to all of your employees, and they're like, nobody here does that. We all hate each other. Nobody's happy. Like the document is now worthless, right? Because nobody's using it to be a sort of guiding principle for what the organization is.
Right.
So my process for building this is to first change the page. Maybe I hit the arrow. There we go. Okay. First, pick a couple words. So I've heard some people say just pick 2 words. I've heard some people say pick 3 to 5. You wanted to touch on all of the important aspects of the company culture. So use as many as you think you need. And I have a bunch of different examples here in this second paragraph. So team focused, integrity, curiosity, patience, honesty, creative, responsible, challenging, ambitious, blah, blah, blah. Just to kind of get your brain going. You can also Google this and there will be a bazillion more.
Right.
So you pick the words that seem to be the most important.
And I noticed though that yeah, you use these words in hiring, but you also use it in your brand message, your marketing, everything you do revolves around this. This is just not HR when you get this
Correct.
exercise done.
Right. So that's the sort of like the later parts of it. So after you pick those words, then you want to write basically your own definition of what that word means within your organization. Then after you do that, and this is like a little handbook that allows you to sort of walk you through all of this, the third step is to get feedback and revise it from your existing team. So I would pick the highest level members of the organization, if you have a business partner, if you have managers, if it's just you and a couple employees, whoever's the most engaged in the organization, the most loyal, ask them, say, does this seem to reflect what we really are? So when I made this for our restaurant, I showed it to one of my managers and she was like, Anne, you have missed so much. That's not the right definition for that. You haven't described how we do creativity here. So she put so much more into it. And so this is this thing that's like, you're often too close to it to know how to describe it.
Right.
So that's why I do think it is valuable to have somebody else help you with it, whether it's an outside consultant like me or it's somebody within your organization who can see it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So then once you've made the document and you feel that it's, that it's accurate and reflective of the organization, then you incorporate it internally. So this is using it in all of your HR processes. I share it with every person once I hire them. I read it out loud to them. And I use it as an anchor because, so I had an example where I had hired this person and I thought she was going to be great, right? And so I'm reading the core values to her and I said, I said, at this point, the way our team works is that it's self-sustaining. So if like the members of the team, without me even being involved, will tell me if somebody is not a culture fit at this point, right? And they will let me know, hey, this person isn't clicking, this isn't right, like, and here are the 3 or 4 reasons why. Well, sure enough, like 5 days later, I had that exact conversation with one of my managers who was like, after that person left, the whole rest of the team sat down and was like, this is not working. Like she doesn't know how to learn. She's not humble. She thinks she knows all the answers already. Like, I don't think that this is going to work out. And so at that point I was like, okay, I'm going to cut my losses. We've only had 2 days of training here. Let's, but like reading that out loud to the employees can act as an anchor to say, like, this really is who we are. And if you aren't this, I'm so sorry. Like, thank you for trying, but this isn't going to work,
Right.
So there's a lot of opportunities to use it when you're initially hiring somebody. Once they're in and they're part of the team, then it's less of like a thing that's in their face. But I've sat down with managers after they've been with us for a year or 2 years and read it to them again and said, does this still seem accurate and reflective of who we are as an organization? Just to make sure that it's, that it's living and it's still correct, So I think that there's ways you can kind of continue to touch back to it. And the fifth step, which this is kind of what you were saying, is to share it externally, right? Like, don't keep it a secret if you have a great company culture, because this is a part of how, when you say like always be hiring, I've had people read this stuff on our website and send me messages and say, hey, I saw all of those things that you've said about what it means to be a member of your team, and I would love to work there. That seems like a great place to work. And if somebody reaches out because of that, there's a pretty good chance that they're going to be a good culture fit, right?
Right, yeah.
If they're self-selecting in because they think the way you talk about your culture is a good fit for them personally, this is a good fit, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I've done social media posts where you kind of scroll through the different words to let your customers know, right, that you take care of your employees, that you care about them, that this is a sort of internal working culture. There's no reason to keep this stuff a secret and do it quietly, because it can help you like attract good employees who are right fit, and it can also help your customers be more inclined to support your brand if they also believe in those things.
Right.
So yeah, so that's sort of the whole process of building a core value statement.
And so just to be clear, so like when you do your first interview or even just your first phone talk, you use these words in the discussion with them. So it's right on the table, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you're putting them in the job description so that when you post that as the job posting, it's there from the very beginning, you know? Yeah, it's meant, my thing with this stuff is when you know what you're looking for, you have a better chance of finding it.
Yeah.
Right. But you do have to go through the process of figuring out what it is that you're looking for, right? And so there is a time in the life cycle of a business when it makes sense to start to invest in building these things, because you kind of have to just like throw some stuff at the wall and see what sticks and see what works before you try to put words to it. Because if you're within your first year of running the organization, you're just hiring a human being, right, that has a pulse, and that's it. You know, it wasn't until I was like 4 or 5 years in that I was able to say, these are the kind of people that work well with us, and here's some definition and language that I can put around that. So
has your values changed over time? Do you change them much or ever at all?
I mean, so I've continued to go back and look at our value statement and say, is this, you know, that question, is this still accurate? For us, it hasn't. I haven't found a reason to change it, but I do think with all of these things, they're meant to be living documents, so that if you add some sort of new piece of like, we're trying to find this kind of employee and and offer this kind of opportunity for them, that may be an additional piece that you wanted to add to things. I feel like the other things, the job descriptions probably change more, the interview questions probably change more, the handbook often changes more. Core values is the one thing that I've changed less often than some of the other things, but I still do think it's important to to touch base every now and again and check and see if it still seems accurate. I do think it's important to note that the core value statement is not the same as a mission statement for the organization. So this isn't saying we're trying to serve this product to this particular customer to benefit this overarching goal in the world, right? It's meant to be, what does it mean to be a good, strong, contributing member of your team? So this is like a person, an internal person thing, not like we're trying to be the best graphic design firm in the city of Lexington, right? Those are two different things. So I think it's you need to know that as you're building that statement, to make sure that you're picking the correct words. Yeah, just because there's different definitions and people use the words in different ways, and so that's my definition of a core value statement.
Okay.
So moving on to the next document. So this would be then identifying the roles that you need in the organization, and then building, building job descriptions. So as you build the different roles,
maybe we should define a role as you see it first.
So this is, in some organizations it's obvious, right? Like in a restaurant, there's a server, there's a cook, there's a dishwasher, there's a busser. But there's sometimes there may be a period where you have to try different things and figure out exactly what what is the role that you need, right? So this is a very present example for us right now. We have a server assistant role in the restaurant that previously functioned in one way, and then we've added some new tables. And so we now have, sometimes we have 2 server assistants. And so we've tried 3 or 4 different iterations of what are these roles when they're working, who's doing this, who's doing that. And so some of this is that you want to like write it down, try it, see if it works. And then if it doesn't work, then go back to your sort of job description, make changes to it and say, no, it's not this, it's not that. Now it's this, right? So there is a process of iterating and figuring out what exactly is the role that you need. But I do think it's valuable to start by writing down what you think you need, so that you have then something to go back to and say, like, here are the 5 tasks I said this role was going to do. I only needed to do these 3. It can't do all 5 of those. That's too much, right? So as you're putting together the job description, A, figure out what the role is that you need. B, at the top of it, you're writing this is where you're sort of extracting language from your value statement, saying, this is what the culture is of the organization. This is the kind of person that we're looking for, right? So you're saying that at the very top of it. And that can be something that because that should be the same regardless of the position, right? So that you can just copy and paste for every different job description that you've got. So then the next part is to write the specific tasks of the role, and then that's more into the responsibilities. The role, the part above that is just writing like the highlights of this person needs to do these 2 things very well. And then now under responsibilities, you're making a list of the very specific things that they're doing.
Right.
Then requirements. So this is any requirements that you have as far as like background experience, education that they need to have had, ability to do certain physical tasks, ability to use certain kinds of software, like all of the things that they have to have in order to be able to do the job. If there's a dress code, then you would put that down there. If there's specific hours that you need them to work, you would list all of that there, what the compensation is, and then the benefits, both formal and informal, for that particular position. So it's a document that's got a lot of meat in it. I often see job descriptions that have a lot of like duplicity, where they're just listing the same thing kind of in different ways. So try and pull that stuff out so that it's just the stuff that they need.
I hate when it says must be able to sit and stand,
Duh.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and what's like an informal benefit? Define that for everyone.
So that's like if you give employee meals at the end of the night for if you're in a restaurant. Some of those things that I was saying, like if you set up that every month you were going to give the folks on your team a $50 credit to to purchase wholesale orders.
Right.
If there's some kind of like gift certificate share between different organizations, whether you work in a shop and you're friends with the shop next door and you exchange gift cards and folks have access to that on some kind of consistent basis. I also put in here, at year 1, there's evaluation and the opportunity for a raise. And more vacation time. Year 2, there's the same thing. After that, you go into a bonus program, blah, 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 or, give them some expectation on, if you stay here for several years, here's what you can expect to get as far as additional compensation. I've had clients who haven't clarified this either in any written form or in any sort of verbal form, and then employees assume because they've been there for a year that they're going to get another dollar. Well, I've had that situation happen, and that particular employee is like horrible, and they're like just 1/2 of a breath from getting fired. Yet they're sitting there thinking that they're going to get a whole other dollar, and the restaurant owner is like, not a chance. Like, if you have a job, that's going to be like a huge win for you, So this is where saying like, here's the expectations, and then following through on them is super important, because because then you have people walking around thinking, I'm about to get me a raise, and then when they don't, it can be tricky.
Very uncomfortable.
Yeah. So creating an interview structure. So this is where you're kind of identifying what's the process that you want to follow as you have interviews with people. This page right here is essentially like copying down some of the same language from the core value statement. So when you say whole organization qualities, this is really saying like, I want to make sure that I find somebody who's responsible, who's creative, and who is a team player, right? If those were your three words, so you would write those over here again. Then in the different sections, and this is just what it would be if it was a restaurant, now you're writing specific skill sets for each of the particular departments or the different positions.
And this is all preparation you do before you even talk to your first person?
Correct. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So then as you're making, then this page here is really valuable because this, again, this is all sort of restaurant focused, but, and I adjust this when I'm working with different kinds of organizations, but if it's, my suggestion is to first have a phone interview because there's a lot that you can tell just from having a short phone conversation. And so rather than just calling them to schedule an in-person interview, when half of the time after having that phone conversation, you're like, there's no chance that they're going to come in, they're going to tell me they are, and then I'm going to sit there and waste 15 minutes of my time waiting for somebody to show up that I know is not going to show up.
Yep.
Just have a quick phone interview saying, hey, just wanted to touch base and see if your schedule meets the needs that we need for this particular position. Tell me just a little bit about your background, see if they really do have the experience you're looking for. And if they sound good on the phone, then schedule them for a phone interview.
Right.
Then when you have a phone interview, this is the two sort of things that I keep saying. Do they have the specific skills that you need? And then do they seem to be a culture fit? And then the third part is then having some kind of in-person like shadow shift or what we call stage in the restaurant industry, but having them come in so that that other people on the team can see them. You can get a sense of what kinds of questions they ask. That lets you know a lot of their specific experience. If they ask questions that are like in line with the industry knowledge that you would think that they would have, that would affirm that they're going to be a good person. And then, yeah, like what other, are they jumping in? Are they taking initiative? That will give you a sense of kind of their work ethic. So this has, and I'm going to kind of jump through it, but there's a lot of stuff that I've got in here that are some questions you all can just borrow because they give you a bit more information on their level of reliability and responsibility, like the longest job you were at, how long you were there. Did you give notice when you left that job? If you gave notice, did you work it out, right? Like we have what we call like jumpers, where people have at a job for 3 or 4 months, at all of their jobs for 3 or 4 months only, which means that they don't really have a ton of staying power.
Right.
So those are the kinds of things I'm trying to find is like, do they have some staying power? So these are some questions that have kind of been like tried and true. And what I have, like, this is all just like one big long interview document. So that the idea is that you can, if you're hiring for somebody for this particular department, you can just pull out these 4 pages and print them off.
Right.
So there's some redundancy, but it's meant to be that you sort of pull it
You just
out.
kind of tailored for the position and the role.
Correct.
Like a kitchen is way different than a manager is.
Right.
You'd have to
Right.
kind of massage that a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Things I've learned in an interview to look for is how they listen. So if they interrupt you a lot while you're asking them questions, that often means that they aren't a very good listener. If they're not a very good listener, that often means that they have a decent amount of ego. If they have a decent amount of ego, it means they probably don't want to learn, that they think they have the answers already. And that means that you don't have much to work with.
Mm-hmm.
So that one particular thing I've learned to pay attention to as far as how people, if they interrupt me or not,
right,
while I'm interviewing them. And then just other sorts of things like when you ask them about previous jobs, do they take that opportunity to complain about their previous employer?
I see, yeah.
Which is often a red flag of like, you know, like,
right.
Sure, everybody has like a horrible boss story and there's a time and place to share that. The interview is not it, like, period. So yeah, just sort of know that. This is some different management questions that I've kind of put together that are helpful in understanding kind of like what are they motivated by, because with a manager, it's like they need to be happy in the position. They need to want to learn the things that they can learn in that position to really like work hard and stay with you for some time. So these are things that I've sort of tested out and played with over the years as I interview managers. And yeah, are things that anybody is welcome to borrow if it seems like that it would be helpful for them. Mm-hmm. And then I always have a sort of page of like just writing down some thoughts after the interview is over. And I always try and do an interview with a second person with me, just to get somebody else's, feedback. And if you're a person who has rose-colored glasses and always sees the best in people, which is what I do, I always need somebody in there because I'm like, this is the line I've learned to say, is that if I'm 80% sure the person's going to work out, 100% of the time they don't. And I'll be like, I either have two speeds. I'm either 80% sure they're going to work out, or I'm 100% sure they're going to work out. And so if I end up saying 80% sure that they're going to work out, it means that there's something that sort of was like, but I've talked myself out of it.
Right.
So having somebody else there with you can be helpful for them to, and have somebody with you who's like, not like that, right?
Yeah.
Who's has less skin in the game than you do, maybe is less desperate to hire somebody,
Right. The objectivity is key to that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I guess if you interview multiple people, you have all this on paper, you have your notes, and it's easier just to compare everything side by side as opposed to trying to remember different things about what you just saw.
Absolutely. I mean, even doing like 3 interviews in a day, you'll forget the stuff from the first interview by the time you finish the third one. So, and having consistent questions helps you to be fair and to kind of cut out any sort of biases that you may have based on the way they dress or the way they look. So I do think that there is something to be said for having a consistent process that's like, it doesn't matter what they show up with, you're asking the same questions and you're going through the same process. It helps to make sure that things are being equal and fair.
I've noticed that like if you interview 3 people, generally whoever came last gets hired.
That's the person you remember the most. Right. Yeah. So, and that can be something, if you have somebody doing the interview with you, having them sort of take notes and write the stuff down on the little question form can be helpful because, it can be a lot to like ask the questions and talk to the person and go back and forth and then also be writing everything down. So there is an art to interviewing. And I mean, I've seen where like the people doing it get nervous and kind of like, aren't totally on their game. And so this stuff sort of helps to smooth out some of those hiccups or bumps along the way. We just have a couple minutes left, so maybe just read through the employee handbook thing if you want to. I think we have, maybe see if we have.
Yeah, we'll send you this later on today. So let's see here. Yeah, staffing and seasonality. I mean, that is tough. Let's just say like you have a lawn service, for example, and you can't keep everybody on board all year long. So yeah, and you have that too because you have outdoor seating, and then you need less people in the wintertime. How does that all balance out?
Yeah, I mean, I think being transparent from the beginning of what your thoughts are on the position, like if you know that the position, particularly if it's some kind of like a summer only thing, that's a very short period of time, like summer camps or something like that. So from the beginning saying this is what you need, so that again, what you need matches up with the needs of the people that you're interviewing. It depends what your sort of swings are. So if it's just like one extra person, I've found that like, for our business, that so often by the time like the fall rolls around, I've got somebody who's like ready to go and do something else. And so that person, that extra spot that I had can kind of like come on like the inside shifts because I like inevitably have one person, that's like going to leave in the fall or wants to go down for a period of time. I've played with, if it's only a couple months off where you have fewer shifts that you need for just like the very winter months, or I guess the reverse, like just the very summer months. But you need people like 9 months out of the year. I've found where I can go and sort of talk individually to people and say, okay, you normally work 4 shifts a week. Would you be happy to just do 3 shifts a week for 3 months to take a little break and drop down for just a short period of time and then come back in March or April when I know that I need extra people. And I've had, because this is like a second job for many of our folks, so I've had several people who are happy to do that, who have something else going on, and so they're fine to take like a few months off in the winter. Or if it's just like going down one shift versus losing everything altogether, and then you just kind of start from zero. So that's been something that I've just found to be more successful in the last 2 years, is to have people who are willing to kind of like go down for a bit, but then then they're ready to come back in the spring and I don't have to train somebody new,
Right.
which is brilliant.
Yeah.
So kind of putting the words out like late summer when you have a few months to say, hey, I'm going to be looking to get rid of a couple of shifts. If anybody is interested, opt in so that you're not kind of forcing them out.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, if there's any other questions out there, now's the time to ask. We're at the top of the hour and getting a little short on time.
I could talk all day about this stuff. 1 hour is not enough. But all my client meetings are 2 hours because there's a lot to
it is
dive into.
It is one of the hardest things that any business owner does is I think coming up with a process like you have is really key to your success and anybody's success. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Dave. And yeah, anybody who is interested in this little handbook or tool that we have, right, they can just put their name and email in the chat.
Yeah, if you want to put your contact in the chat, we'll just send it out to all the participants.
Okay.
So I think it'd be the easiest thing to do. And then feel free to reach out to Ann. She's a great resource. She's here for you. And we'll get you guys connected. We'll put our contact in there also when we send this out for you. So Janet, everything else we need to talk about today, or we move on?
No, I think we covered quite a bit. I think it was great to have Ann back with us, and it's always great to see her. So thank you, Ann, for sharing your knowledge with our clients here today.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today for another Toolkit Tuesday. I hope you found this helpful. And as always, we'll be back next week, next Tuesday. So put us on your calendar and we'll see you then. So have a good Tuesday, everybody.